The annual rate of inflation is just below 7%, which is the highest level in 4 decades. Are the Trudeau Liberals to blame, or is just factors outside of Canada influencing the higher cost of food, fuel, and heating our homes? Lethbridge MP and the Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachael Thomas, has her thoughts, and she joins us now from the nation's capital. Rachael, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you, Hal. It's really nice to be here with you.
Yeah, you too. Now, the cost of food has gone up by more than 11% over the past year. Some restaurants here in Lethbridge closed their doors, as you're well aware, including Mocha Cabana and Sam's Donaires and Hamburgers. When we chatted with the owners, they said, you know what, we just can't keep up anymore with the high cost of food. Is the federal government to blame for this?
Yeah, I think that there's a few complexities involved, but certainly the federal government has part of the blame to bear. And, I would say particularly with regards to taxation and inflation, which seem to be the two largest measures at play here. So with regards to taxation, we're watching as the Liberals are increasing the carbon tax, we're watching as they're increasing payroll taxes. I'm hearing from local businesses within our community and across Canada that this is having a dramatic impact on their ability to, make a go of it. But also inflation. So we know that as inflation, goes up, businesses are trying to run with narrow margins as it is in terms of what their expenditures are and what their revenue is. And so at the end of the day, I'm hearing from many local businesses that are just having a hard time making a go of it, especially in the food industry when you're watching prices go up by, somewhere along the lines of 11 to 12%. Well, that's significant. And then you try to pass that on to the customer, and the customer already feels squeezed. And so then they just stop eating out. And so because Canadians are finding it more difficult to make ends meet, they go out to restaurants less frequently, and as a result, then of course, we're unfortunately facing some of these shutdowns.
Now, a number of farmers who provide a lot of the food that we enjoy dry their grain with natural gas and are also concerned about the increase in the carbon tax by the Trudeau Liberals. What are you hearing from our producers here in southwestern Alberta?
Yeah, and it's certainly all of this is tied in, right? It all has to do with government policy and taxation and affordability. So with regard to farmers, I mean, let's just take a moment and celebrate just the incredible nature of these folks. These are the women and men who are working remarkably hard to feed not only Canadians, but to feed the world. I wish our government acknowledged that. I wish that was celebrated instead of punished. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So instead, we have a government that's looking to increase the carbon tax. In fact, it's going to triple by 2030. In addition to that, the government is saying that they want to see reductions by 30% to the use of fertilizer, which is going to have a dramatically harmful impact on farmers and their ability to be able to produce food, again, food that feeds Canada and the world. And so, I'm hearing these concerns from farmers. They're very distraught because they're trying to do a good job. They're trying to take care of us, and they feel like they're being penalized by the government for doing so.
Your leader, Pierre Poilievre, has blasted the Trudeau Liberals as well in the House of Commons about tripling the carbon tax. How do you think this will really impact the average Canadian household as well, especially as the mercury plummets and we roll into the colder winter months?
Mm-hmm. It's certainly a big concern for me. I've had numerous people come into my office with their home heating bills, and they'll often circle the carbon tax line so that I can see directly what it equates to for them, and they're just totally distraught. And for good reason. Again, the Trudeau Liberals have determined that they are going to triple the carbon tax. Well, at the end of the day, we know people need to heat their homes. This is Canada. And so putting a carbon tax on that is just punitive in nature. It's not actually going to help curb behavior. So the Canadians are seeing that. I guess I would just say this. Over the last year, people have watched their home heating bills double. And we are being told that we can expect home heating to come up by another 30 to 50% this winter. We know Canadians are already having a really hard time making ends meet, putting food on their table, paying their rent, getting their kids to sports. Watching their heating bill increase by another $100 a month, it's too much. And so people are certainly speaking out and expressing a great deal of concern.
Now, you are the CPC's Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, and you're bringing forward a motion calling for the Minister of Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez, to appear before a committee to answer questions regarding a large sum of money that was given to someone who was an alleged anti-Semite. Can you explain?
So Mr. Maroof is the individual we're referring to, and he was given about $133,000 in government contracts from the Heritage Department in order to run anti-racism training. That's what it was called. Uh, this is interesting because we see a myriad of tweets and other social media posts that are incredibly derogatory in nature. They are extremely vile. I mean, this individual went so far as to call Jews human bags of feces. Those are his words. Those are his exact words used on Twitter. And the truth is, the sad truth is that that's actually only the tip of the iceberg. The vile nature of this individual's comments are it's hard to even fathom. And so to see that the government actually contracted this individual to the tune of $133,000 to run an anti-racism program is just wow. And so, anyways, all that to say, that information came to light in the department in mid-July. And it took a month and a half for the Heritage Minister, Minister Rodriguez, to finally make a statement about it. And for myself and for so many Canadians, especially those that are part of the Jewish community, that is just reprehensible. Like it is just it's atrocious that the minister would take a month and a half to finally come out with a statement, let alone take action. And so, I think at the end of the day, Canadians deserve better. Canadians want better. And so now they're calling for transparency. They're calling for accountability. They want to know how this happened. They want to know what the government's going to do differently going forward. And I think they're frustrated with the minister and his overall inaction on this issue. So at Heritage Committee, it's our responsibility to hold the minister to account. And so we've asked for him to come and testify. Unfortunately, our motions that we have moved have been shut down. For some reason, the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc seem to want to protect the minister and keep him from having to answer important questions. But we're going to keep trying because that's our job. Our job as opposition is to hold the government to account and to bring forward the initiatives that are required to do so.
Now, Rachel, you've also attacked the Liberals on Bill C-18, which you say will proliferate fake news, misinformation, and promote clickbait. Now, you asked Heritage Minister Pablo Rodriguez to make amendments to the bill. What did he have to say?
Yeah, Bill C-18 is just a terrible piece of legislation that will destroy the internet the way that we know it. And so one of the things that this bill does is it forces Google and Facebook as platforms to enter into negotiations with any news outlet that has two full-time journalists, so that they can be compensated for the news that is being shared. The problem with this, Hal, is that there are no other criteria that are established. It's just simply two full-time journalists. And so it's left incredibly gray. So what constitutes news? What counts, what doesn't? So essentially, if the bill is left the way that it is, really it forces Google and Facebook's hands to have to negotiate, which means that they could be in a place where they are forced to proliferate news that is fake or disinformation or just altogether reprehensible. Um, and so I think that's dangerous. I think that's extremely dangerous. And if this bill truly is about making sure that Canadians have access to choice in the media and making sure they have access to a variety of viewpoints, making sure they have access to good journalism, then perhaps the government should invest some time and energy into making sure that there are amendments made to this bill to ensure that it actually does do those things they're claiming to do.
Ottawa brought forth their legislation putting a freeze on handguns. They say it will really curtail gun violence and keep our streets safer in Canada. But let me ask you something. How do you see it?
Well, interestingly enough, despite all of their efforts, despite all of the firearms legislation that has been put in place by this government, since the Liberals took the helm in 2015, gun violence has skyrocketed. It has dramatically increased in this country. That should be very telling. For me, and for many experts who are looking at this, this is the conclusion. The conclusion is that this government is more interested in going after individuals who own their firearms legally, use their firearms legally, abide by the law, keep the peace. They're responsible citizens. Those are the people that the government is choosing to go after. Well, we know that's not going to make a difference. It's just going to make their lives difficult. But meanwhile, gangs and illegal trafficking of firearms, Those are two problems that are not being tackled by this government. And so those problems will continue to perpetuate. And that's exactly what we're seeing because we're watching as crime is going through the roof. Now, what I find interesting is that while this government is putting a freeze on handguns, they are simultaneously moving Bill C-5. Bill C-5 actually rewards criminals. It actually takes away minimum sentences for those that would commit a crime using a firearm. So I find it interesting that on one hand they're wanting to freeze handgun purchases, but on the other hand they're actually wanting to let criminals off the hook if they commit a crime using a firearm. It's it's again, it's just so hard to fathom, and it's incredibly destructive to our country, to our democracy, to our people, to our confidence in the government and in the justice system. It's just wrong because really what the Liberals are doing is they're playing politics. They're trying to pretend that they're doing something that they're not. Our communities are not safer because of their legislation.
The public inquiry into the Emergencies Act continues in Ottawa. A number of city officials have already testified, and there's been a lot of finger pointing so far. Now, how do you see it, Rachel? Was the federal government correct in invoking the act last February during the Freedom Convoy?
Hmm. Well, I think, at the end of the day, there's a very high bar that is set in order for the Emergencies Act to be justified. And what that means is that, it's reserved for the most serious circumstances. Circumstances, where regular legal powers would not be able to resolve the issue at hand. And so ultimately now with the public inquiry, it is going to be determined through this process as to whether or not that high bar was really met. So, I'm going to watch that unfold, but I would say that based on my observations, these were law-abiding citizens who were, protesting on Parliament Hill, wanting to make their voices heard. Certainly, they felt ignored, they felt silenced, they felt scapegoated. Yes, there was some discomfort around it for folks, but really, this is not a question about discomfort. This is a question about whether or not other legal means could have been used to resolve this issue. That's going to be up to this commission to decide, and I'm going to be watching closely. And I would encourage Canadians to do the same because ultimately, whatever the outcome, we do need to hold the government to account.
And these concerned Canadians who protested during the Freedom Convoy were also not funded by the Russians, like some other media outlets reported early on in the campaign. A number of Conservatives are quite concerned with the coalition formed by the Liberals and the NDP. The NDP is an opposition party and should be acting like one instead of being part of this coalition until the year 2025. Now, you say this coalition is not working in the best interest of Canadians. How so?
It's based on this basic premise, Hal. Democracy works when there is a governing party and opposing parties. That is how Canada is set up. So when one of those opposing parties chooses to not fulfill its role, it is actually thwarting democracy. So the NDP going on side with the Liberals and making a determination to keep the Liberals in power is actually really sad for Canadians because Canadians deserve transparency. They deserve accountability. They deserve a strong democratic system. And so it is disappointing to watch it play out. And I certainly don't believe that it's in the best interest of Canadians. And that's something that I'm hearing from many folks who are taking the time to write into my office or phone me, meet with me. They're very concerned with regard to the state of our democracy, where we're at, and the lack of accountability for the current government.
Now, Rachel, you have seen firsthand, because this is your home riding as well in Lethbridge, we still have serious drug, crime, and homeless issues in our city, especially with the tent encampments. The police have been tearing some of them down, but again, where are homeless going to go, right? Now, you as our MP, how are you working with our MLAs and Mayor Blaine Hagan to really address these very serious concerns in our city?
Mm-hmm. A really good question, Hal. And this is a problem that we've faced for quite some time in our community, and we've tried, various ways of addressing it. I would say that right now, I'm watching as the situation is being exacerbated. One of the factors that is exacerbating it is actually the cost of living and affordability. Just in the last few months, I've had two different folks come into my office and share with me that one individual had to give up their place because they couldn't afford rent and now live in their car. Another couple came into my office and said they couldn't make their mortgage payments, and so they actually went to insolvency and then now live in a small RV. These are real stories. These are people in our community, and these folks went from having a home to now not having a home. If that continues, we will watch as homelessness continues to rise as well. That concerns me. But there are also the issues of mental health and addiction, and all of this needs to be addressed. And so, one of the ways we can do that is by working together with all three levels of government and community partners. And so, there has been a roundtable established, and we're meeting to talk about this issue and to figure out the next steps ahead. But I think there's also an important point to make, if I may just take a second, and that is this. Oftentimes, the good initiatives that are taking place are overshadowed by the growing problem. And I do recognize that the problem needs to be addressed. But I also just want to give a little bit of a shout out to the incredible not for profit organizations and charities and churches that are doing remarkable work in our community to try to get at this issue and make a meaningful difference in people's lives. Because I do believe they need to be celebrated and known for the good work that they're doing. Um, even though we do see that the problem does need far more attention.
Yeah, some of the nonprofits, including Streets Alive, and as well the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen with Bill Ginthers, they do incredible work here. Lethbridge MP and Shadow Minister for Canadian Heritage, Rachael Thomas, thanks so much for joining us today from Ottawa.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.